In Formula One, there are only 20 seats in the world. 20. Every single one of them represents a lifetime of sacrifice, obsession, and relentless competition. Thousands of drivers grow up dreaming of being here, but almost all of them fall short. That reality is what makes the debate around Lance Stroll so emotionally charged and endlessly controversial. Because for many fans, Stroll represents a question that cuts to the core of Formula One itself. Is this sport still purely about merit, or has money rewritten the rules? For years now, Lance Stroll's place at Aston Martin has been questioned from every angle. Fans argue about it online. Pundits tiptoe around it on broadcasts. Rival drivers are asked about it carefully, if at all. And hovering over the entire discussion is one unavoidable fact. His father, Lance Stroll, owns the team. That alone guarantees scrutiny. But does it automatically mean Lance doesn't belong in Formula One? Or is the reality more complicated than the internet wants it to be? Today, instead of outrage or hot takes, let's slow this down and really examine the case for and against Lance Stroll, and ask a difficult but fair question. As Aston Martin pushes toward the front of the grid, is this driver pairing still good enough? There's no point dancing around the obvious. Lance Stroll benefits from a level of job security that almost no other driver in Formula One history has ever enjoyed. In a sport where contracts can vanish overnight, his seat is effectively locked in. That fuels the pay driver label that's followed him since his debut, and it's the foundation of most criticism aimed his way. Fans don't just question his pace, they question whether he'd still be here if his last name were different. And when people criticize his performance, they're not pulling arguments out of thin air. Stroll is one of the most inconsistent drivers on the grid. At his best, he can look genuinely impressive. His pole position in the rain at the 2020 Turkish Grand Prix wasn't luck. It was skill, confidence, and control in brutal conditions. His podium in Baku during his rookie season showed racecraft far beyond his experience level. Those moments matter because you cannot fake them at this level. The problem is what happens between those moments. For every standout performance, there are long stretches where Stroll fades into the midfield, struggles in qualifying, or makes small but costly mistakes. In isolation, those errors aren't unusual. Even elite drivers have off weekends, but over multiple seasons, patterns start to form, and consistency is the currency of championship teams. Right now, that's where Stroll's critics feel most justified. There's also the question of development. Stroll is no longer a rookie learning on the job. He's a seasoned Formula One driver with years of experience across different teams, regulations, and teammates. While he has improved since his debut, many argue that his growth curve has flattened. The gap between him and the very best drivers, the true title contenders, still appears stubbornly wide. And in a sport where progress is relentless, standing still can be just as damaging as going backward. That said, dismissing Stroll entirely would be dishonest. You don't score multiple podiums, qualify on pole, or survive years in Formula One without real talent. His supporters argue, with some justification, that Stroll has often been judged more harshly than others because of his background. They point out that when conditions suit him, he can absolutely perform at a high level, and they also argue that stability matters. Unlike many drivers who bounce between teams, Stroll has been part of Aston Martin's long-term journey, dating back to its Force India and Racing Point days. He understands the team, the culture, and the personnel in a way a new signing simply wouldn't. But here's where the debate gets serious. Aston Martin is no longer a midfield project. This is a team with massive financial backing, a brand new factory, elite technical hires, and a full-works Honda engine deal starting in 2026. These are not the moves of a team content with occasional podiums. These are the moves of a team chasing championships, and championships, especially the constructors' title, demand two drivers who can consistently score big points. That's the pressure point. As Aston Martin edges closer to the front, every gap between teammates becomes magnified. Every missed Q3 appearance, every anonymous race, every Sunday where one car fights at the front while the other slips backward. It all matters. And that pressure doesn't just come from fans or media. It comes from inside the garage. Engineers, strategists, mechanics, they all want to win. And they all know that success in Formula One is rarely carried by one driver alone. Replacing Stroll, however, isn't as simple as it sounds. On paper, there are drivers who could offer more raw pace. Names like Carlos Sainz or even emerging talents from the junior categories are often mentioned, but change carries risk. A new driver needs time to adapt. Chemistry matters, and replacing the team owner's son introduces a level of internal tension that could easily backfire. Stability, even imperfect stability, sometimes beats disruption. There's also another uncomfortable detail that often gets overlooked. Despite his long career, no rival team has ever aggressively pursued Lance Stroll. In Formula One, that speaks volumes. The paddock is ruthless when it comes to talent evaluation. If teams believed Stroll could elevate them, interest would exist. The absence of that interest is perhaps the strongest argument against him, not from fans, but from decision-makers who live and breathe performance data. When you compare Stroll to drivers from his generation, Lando Norris, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, the contrast becomes clearer. Those drivers didn't just show flashes, they sustained excellence. They dragged performances out of cars that had no right being there. They became leaders. Stroll, so far, hasn't crossed that threshold. Two additional narratives often swirl around him, though neither fully holds up under scrutiny. One is the claim that he's lost motivation or considered retiring, only to be persuaded otherwise by his father. That rumor, originating from an unnamed pundit, was publicly dismissed by Stroll himself, who laughed it off and denied ever wanting to quit. Another is the idea that top-tier technical minds wouldn't want to work with him. In reality, the opposite seems true. Since joining Aston Martin, Adrian Newey, one of the most respected designers in the sport, has repeatedly defended Stroll, calling him underrated and unfairly criticized. Newey has pointed out that when compared to high-level teammates like Sergio Perez, Sebastian Vettel, and Fernando Alonso, Stroll has often been closer than public perception suggests. Reports from early 2025 even indicated that Newey was pleasantly surprised by Stroll's commitment and work ethic behind the scenes. That support matters. So where does this leave Lance Stroll? As long as Lawrence Stroll owns Aston Martin, Lance's seat is secure. That reality isn't changing anytime soon, but security doesn't erase pressure. The 2026 regulation reset will be a defining moment. If Aston Martin produces a genuinely championship-capable car, the spotlight on Stroll will be brighter than ever. At that point, there will be no hiding behind context, reputation, or potential. If he delivers consistently, the conversation changes. If he doesn't, the debate only grows louder. Lance Stroll's story isn't simple. It never has been. He's neither a fraud nor a future world champion. He exists in the uncomfortable middle, where expectations, privilege, talent, and ambition collide. And as Formula One moves into its next era, that collision may finally force a clear answer. The question isn't whether Lance Stroll belongs in Formula One anymore. The question is whether he belongs in a team that wants to win it all.